All right, I've got an empty project here that I have named Snake Game. I've just increased the resource size over here by double clicking, and that's all I've done, and that's where we're going to get started. So the first thing we need to do is create a sprite. I'm going to right click on sprites up here and create sprite. I'm going to name it SPR Snake. So again, naming conventions are important. If you don't do exactly what I do, that is okay. Just make sure that whatever you do, it is consistent so that it's always the same. All right, our snake, we need to actually change the size of it because we're going to have a fairly small room, as you saw. So over here we have the width and the height. That's what this W and H stands for, and it's in pixels, as you can see. Now, if you don't know what a pixel is, it is the smallest unit of measurement on a screen. Every electronic is just made up of lots and lots of pixels. So when we talk about resolutions such as 1920 by 1080, that's 1920 pixels across and 1080 pixels down. That's what it's talking about. It's the pixels in there. So when we create something for 2D art, it's normally made from pixels. So if the size is 1, that right there is 1 pixel. So currently, our snake is 64 by 64 pixels. We're going to click on this little arrow and we can resize it. We've got two options. We can resize the image or the canvas. So when we resize the image, it takes everything inside of it and squishes it down. If we resize the canvas, it actually just takes the overall width and height, brings it down or brings it up, and it doesn't care what's inside of it. So most of the time you're going to want to scale an image, but let me show you the difference between the two. So if we come in here and I make a circle like this, come back out, let's resize it two ways. I'm going to resize it to 32 by 32, and if you wanted to have a different width and height, a different ratio, you have to uncheck this box right here. Otherwise, they'll both change in accordance to what they were before. So I'll click apply, and now you can see it kind of changed, but it's still the same spot inside of the image, and it looks roughly the same. And now it is 32 by 32 pixels. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to press Control Z, and now it is back to 64 by 64. Okay, the other way to resize things, I'm going to go into our sprite and show you another way. If you click on image up here, all of the image options appear. And resized frames is the same thing we were clicking on out there. So voila. Now if we come in and we resize the canvas to 32 by 32, you can already see the preview right here. It has changed dramatically because we've actually cut out the excess area around the circle and we haven't cared about the circle itself. So let's come back in, Control Z, and Control Z one more time to get rid of the circle. And those are the two ways to resize. Most of the time you'll want to resize the image itself. What I'm going to do is come up to image, resize all frames, 32 by 32, and then I can press F for the fill tool over here. It's a big bucket. I'm going to click on this green, I'm going to paste it right there, and the whole thing becomes green. So there is our snake. Here's a center fit so you can see the whole thing. And it has a lot of properties that we're going to touch on as we go. But for now, that's all we need to do. You can now create and modify your sprites. Awesome. Let's go ahead and make an object called obj snake. Let's assign it that sprite, which is done right here. And now what I want to do is get this object moving around in our world just like how we're going to do in our game. So the first thing, which I often forget, is you open up the room and you bring in the snake. If the object is not in the room, it's not going to show up in your game. There you go. Okay, that's all we need to do on the room front. Now let's add some events. What I want to do is use the events for our movement. So there are a lot of different ways that we can do movement, but the way we are going to do it is by using key pressed, and then we can choose left, right, up, and down. So we're going to use the arrow keys here. So I'm going to choose this one first, and then I'm going to add the other events as well. So do key pressed for right, key pressed for up, and key pressed for down. Okay, now we have all of these events. So if any of the arrow keys get pressed, we want to make it go in the direction that the arrow key is facing. That makes sense. But how do we do that really simply? Well, we use the built-in properties of every object. We've talked about the built-in variables x and y already, but there are a few more. One of them is direction. And this is the direction that it is going. Not necessarily how fast it's going, that's controlled by something else, but this is just the direction it is moving. And GameMaker Studio uses a 360-degree direction system. So let me just show you what that looks like. I've taken a screenshot of the room, and this is how direction works. In GameMaker Studio, it's 360 degrees, so it's all the way around the object, whatever one you're looking at. And it starts on the right. So this is 0. This is 90. Left is 180. And down, as I'm sure you've already guessed, is 270. And you've got all the numbers in between. So you can go from 0 to 359.9. Once you hit 360, it just goes right back to 0, so it knows that. So we want to set the direction based on the key that we press. So let's go ahead and do that. On key press down, we're going to set direction to 270. Let's go into right and say direction equals 0, because right is the first one and GameMaker starts by looking at the right. If we go up, direction equals 90, and left, direction equals 180. So with these events, we have now set the direction that our snake should go. The only thing left to do is to set its speed. And right now, we don't have that. But fortunately, there is also a built-in variable for speed. It's right here. It's just called speed, which is great. But we don't want to set that inside of here. We actually want the snake to always be moving. That's one of the things about the game that's pretty much in every single game, is the snake moves on its own. So we want to set our speed, but we only want to set it one time. The way we do that, add event, the create event. So the first time the snake gets created, we set our speed equal to 1. And then from there, it will just always be 1 unless we change it. So now, let's press F5 and test out our snake. So now it is moving to the right because that's what it defaults to. But if we press up, we go up, left, down, right. Perfect. We have our snake, we have some controls, and that is awesome. So that's our first object in the world being controlled by us. It is a playable object. Good job. And now before we move on to creating the food we're going to consume as the snake, I want to take a quick break and discuss comments and how to use them and why you should use them. And we're going to talk about that in the next video.